Good afternoon, everyone. It is good to see you all. So today is our second day of Gateway to the Middle East and Horn of Africa. So for today, you may want the paper version of this if you prefer to write things on paper. There's also a version of this on Canvas if you prefer, like if you normally type your notes on your computer. You may want to just download this from Canvas, type your notes into it, and then upload it back up. If you do the paper style, I'll collect it at the end of class. Otherwise, it's due on Canvas. Um, Basically, I just want to make sure that you have this information um, in one form or another. So, what are we doing today? Today, we're going to be talking about the sort of story of the Middle East from ancient times up to 1960. Basically, we're trying to get a very broad overview of developments in the region, and this will give us something to hook onto over the rest of the quarter as we're going to have different speakers coming in. We're going to be kind of moving through history and kind of thinking more about cultural things sometimes, or more about religious things sometimes, more about different kinds of things. This will give us something to hook onto. Okay, so this is kind of the big overview. This handout should hopefully also help you to know what I think is important about what we're talking about today. And I will just tell you right now, a number of these questions will probably turn up on the first quiz. So this is a good handout to keep close to your heart. So we remember what this course is, right? We talked about this last time. This course is an introduction to the cultures, experiences, and contributions of the people of the Middle East and Horn of Africa from ancient to modern times. As much as possible, we're going to be looking at this through primary sources. The texts and art and artifacts and media created by the people in this area during various times. Okay. So last time we got a little introduction to the geography and environment of the Middle East. So let's see. Can anyone tell me, just yell out, everyone tell me, what is this sea? Yeah, that's the Mediterranean Sea. What is this river? The Nile. What is this river? Euphrates. What is this river? The Tigris. That's right. What is this body of water? The Persian Gulf. How about this one? Caspian Sea. How about this one? Yeah, excellent. Okay. What are some modern countries that if we put the modern country division on here, we would be able to see in this map? What are some modern countries that would be here? Turkey,
Egypt,
Egypt, Syria,
Saudi Arabia,
Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iran,
Kuwait,
Kuwait, Israel,
Palestine,
Palestine,
Lebanon,
Lebanon.
Iraq.
Yeah, Iraq is on here. Yeah. And there are some more. I can't remember exactly which ones we said at this point, but we know where we are, right? We're getting the idea. We're figuring this out. Last time, we also looked at this map here when we were talking about some stuff. What do we learn from this map? What is this map kind of showing us? Yeah.
Climate zones and regions in the Middle East.
Yeah, we're getting our climate zones and regions based on how much rainfall we get. Why is it important? Why do we care how much rainfall people get? Yeah.
Next resource stability.
Yeah.
Food and stuff they can grow in time.
Yes. So it affects what resources they can, what crops they can grow, how many they can grow. It affects a lot of things about their lifestyle. Absolutely. So this kind of showed us there's not a lot of rain happening over there necessarily, and this affects things quite a bit. So you are going to have people clustering either in areas where you do get rain or where there are rivers or springs. And outside of those regions, we have a lot of people practicing pastoral nomadism, people who move around a lot as part of their way of life with their various herds of sheep, goats, sometimes cattle, although cows require a lot of water. So we have been thinking about that. Now, also last time, we got to hear about why the term Middle East might be a kind of problematic term. What are some things you guys remember? Why is this term? Yeah.
It's mostly a Western term, and the term Middle East doesn't really have any intrinsic qualities that would like define what region is considered the Middle East, and it's changed dramatically over time. It's typically whatever region is considered the Middle East is whatever like region Western media wants to inherit.
Yes, yes. So the term Middle East is a term not made by the people who live here, but by people in the West who like to label things. And so they're saying this is the Middle East, and what they define as the Middle East has changed so much. It changes here, changes there, changes everywhere over the course of the last 100 years. So it's like, what even is part of it? And you're also right, there's no kind of intrinsic quality that would make us say, oh, yes, this region should go together because there's certain geographic features that like lump it all together, or they all speak the same language or something like that. There's no like intrinsic quality. Any other reasons why the term Middle East? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The Middle East term removes the constituent countries and peoples from their geographical and cultural and historical context, and basically places them in an exclusion zone, historically speaking.
Yeah, it removes them from their context. Like we're saying that Egypt is in the Middle East, so we don't talk about Egypt as an African country. Or we talk about Iran as part of the Middle East, so we don't talk about Iran with Central Asia and connected with India, which it's been connected with in terms of trade and culture for thousands of years. Like we're pulling them out and saying, this Middle East, this is a thing, and it's separate from these other things. And so that's maybe not so accurate, right? Now, we also learned about a very important term last time, and this is a term that's going to come up again and again over the course of the quarter, and this is the term Orientalism. Can someone describe for me what Orientalism is? What is Orientalism? Yeah.
It's kind of a cultural tool used to describe people outside of the term that Bonnie last week used, colonial ecosystem, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's like term used to hide the real, like, actual people underneath something comfortable.
Okay. Yeah, so it ends up being a very deceptive term. It's not really reflecting things. Bahar, could you close the door for us? I think it's getting noisy. There's noise coming from somewhere. Oh, you got it. Thank you. All right. So it's definitely a very deceptive term. What in particular is Orientalism kind of describing or doing? Yeah.
So a lot of times it's separating what is a civilized nation and what is not. So by making this juxtaposition, this broad term that everything to the east of European nations is not civilization. They don't have the ability to take care of themselves or the ability to access all their resources or so on.
Yes. So Orientalism is a particular viewpoint that sort of reigned unchallenged, especially in the 1800s, but even from an earlier period and into the 1900s. And it still plagues us to some extent today, although in more subtle ways. The kind of full-blown Orientalism of the 1800s, people don't usually come right out and say today because people will boo them down, which good. But it's still like in more subtle fashion and is definitely still affecting us. And it's this idea that people who live in the Orient, so Orient means east, like Occident means west, right? So people who live in the Orient, they're not as civilized as we are. Because we are so superior and technologically advanced and enlightened. Okay. Interesting. So it's this kind of perspective, and it really denigrates all of the accomplishments and experiences of the people who live in not the West, right? And it was also, you're absolutely right, used as a way to kind of say, oh, yes, Western colonial powers should definitely go over there and should civilize these uncivilized nations. We should bring them the gift of technology by enslaving them and making them work in cotton fields and great stuff like that. Why did our ancestors think like this? But anyway, humans be human and all the time. So this is an idea that we're going to run into again over the course of the quarter. Any questions about stuff we talked about last time, or thoughts or things you wanted to bring up? Okay, what are we going to do today? Today, we're going to try to get a very, very big picture idea of the history of the Middle East up to 1960, mostly looking at maps because I like maps. Although, as we did learn last time, maps often tell you more about the people making the map than about the thing you're mapping. So do keep that in the back of your mind. And we're going to pause every 1,000 years to look at a primary source or two to give us a break from looking at maps and hearing me talk, right? So normally in this class is going to be much more interactive than this, but today is a little bit more talky because there's been a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East. And we're just doing a broad overview, but it's still a lot. And we'll take a break in the middle. Can you guys all see this, or do I need to play with the lights? Give me a thumbs up if you can see this okay. Okay. All right. So we're first going to start with my actual area of expertise, the ancient Middle East, from 3100 to 330 BC in 10 minutes. So during this time, we're going to see that there's a real struggle for resources and the control of trade. So what's going on? In far off days, in distant years, people were living all over the ancient Middle East long before 3000 BC. There are already all kinds of different people speaking many different languages and living in different ways before 3000 BC. There's already so much going on. Many people either lived in farming villages or they were pastoral nomads moving from place to place. We've talked about pastoral nomadism last time. Those in Egypt and Mesopotamia, so Mesopotamia is that area around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, kind of modern Iraq, Iran area. They were already writing before 3300 BC. Okay, so very early, they already have writing. People in Syria have writing by not that long after that. Just to show you what this writing looked like. So here on the left, this is an ancient Sumerian tablet. This is a royal inscription of one of the kings of a city in southern Mesopotamia. And he just wrote this short little inscription about how cool the gods are. Over here on the right, these are the names of some very early kings of Egypt written in early Egyptian cuneiform, early Egyptian hieroglyphs, sorry. So you can see we've already got kind of prototypes of the later Egyptian letters, like birds. A lot of the letters are birds. We've got a plant here. We've got our k bowl. We've got a little ankh, sort of, here. So, but you can see it's not really very standardized. Like these two birds are supposed to be the same kind of bird, but they don't look all that similar. So we're very early days. They're developing writing, but it's not really standardized and exactly what it's going to look like. But they've already got this writing very early on. Yes.
These are all different expressions, same name?
No, these are different names, but this bird and this bird are both the W bird. So, and I think this one too. Although that could theoretically be the Aleph bird, just looking very sad. Anyway, Egyptian is fun. You should take Egyptian. It's a great class. Next phone. So during this really early period in the ancient Middle East, both Mesopotamia, which we can see over here by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and Egypt here on the Nile, they've already got lots and lots of different cities. These cities, for the most part, are making up independent city-states. Do you guys know what a city-state is? Someone define for us what a city-state is? Yeah.
Yeah, the city-state is sort of it's a city governed by a local authority that oversees not only the city, but the area around it. So maybe the city and a couple of smaller villages.
Yes. So it's basically each kingdom is the city and maybe some lesser cities, but definitely farming villages and the kind of farming land around it. In the ancient Middle East, city-states tended to be about 30 square miles. So they're not super big. But as you can see, there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them in a relatively small area. Okay? So most of these city-states early on have kings, although we see that some are ruled instead of kings by groups of elders. So they have a kind of larger governing body. Now, how you become one of these ruling elders is a bit unclear. Some of it seems to be like prominent families, but there does seem to be some variation in how you become an elder of the city. The cities were inhabited by people who spoke many different languages and identified as coming from many different ethnic groups. So even in our earliest texts, we already see that there are people speaking multiple languages in all these cities. There are already people from multiple ethnic backgrounds in different places. So it's not like if we go back far enough in history, we reach a moment where only one set of people lives in each part of the country. That's never been how it is. There's always been a big mix of people. The people in the ancient Middle East were almost entirely polytheistic. Polytheistic is a word meaning many gods. It means they believe in many gods. So they don't just have one god. They don't have no god. They have a group of gods. Usually, each city would have a special patron god who was kind of the guardian of the city or goddess, god or goddess. But they would also worship other gods in that city. So if I go to an ancient Mesopotamian city, maybe there's a big temple to the goddess Inanna there, but there are also going to be many other temples to other gods. And when I go home, I'm probably also worshiping like minor gods and also giving offerings to my deceased ancestors. So there's already very complex religious practice. Now, we have all these different city-states in a pretty small area, and they did not get along. Like, if you look at the historical inscriptions we do have, most of the inscriptions are about them not getting along. What do you guys think these city-states would fight over? Yeah. Okay, that could be an option. Yeah. Pardon? Water? Yes, water is a big one. In purple, yes. Yeah, okay. Yes. Uh-huh. Trade routes, yes, absolutely. Okay, yeah. So they have a number of things they can fight about. In particular, we see them fighting about access to resources, especially water, because both Egypt and Mesopotamia, very little rainfall during this time period. So basically, you need access to the rivers, whether that's the Nile or the Euphrates or the Tigris. If your city is some distance from the Euphrates or Tigris, you need a canal. You need to dig canals. They're always digging canals in the ancient Middle East. And so then you need to control your canal. You don't want some other city that's over the hill coming and diverting your canal and taking your water. You're like, that was my canal. That's my water. I need that to irrigate my fields. Okay. So they're really competing a lot over water and also over other resources. So like if there's copper mines under a particular mountain range or tin mines, they're going to want to control that. If there's turquoise mines, they're going to want to control that. So they're very interested in having access to particular resources. They're also very interested in controlling trade. There were already, very early on, trade routes going thousands of miles across the ancient world. People in Mesopotamia were already importing lapis lazuli all the way from Afghanistan. And you can also find, like in people's burial goods, when you're buried in ancient Mesopotamia, there's not just lapis lazuli, there's gold from Egypt, there's ebony from even farther south in Africa. There might be traces of spices that are coming from the southern Arabian Peninsula. There might be stuff made with tin, which largely came from Anatolia, so modern Turkey in the ancient world. And you're finding all of that in elite burials before 2700 BC. So there's this incredible trade network. They also want to control those trade routes, because if you control a piece of the trade route, you can set the toll. When the merchants come through with their caravan, you can be the person who goes down there and like, hey, pay up. Give me some nice stuff and I'll let you continue on this caravan route, right? So it's very good for your economy to control part of that trade route. Or to control cities that are like trade hubs, because a lot of money comes in and out of there, okay? So they weren't so much interested in land per se. They were interested in the resources that might be on that land or any like pieces of trade routes that might be on that land. But if you don't have cool resources and you don't have a piece of a trade route, they don't care. So they're just like, maybe they'll come through every couple of years and demand taxes, but otherwise they don't care. And nobody cares to like particularly claim that territory. So it's a little bit of a different model than we're used to today. So here's a fun text. This is a royal inscription of a guy named Enannatum, who was a king of the city-state of Lagash in Mesopotamia around the 2400s BCE. This was originally written in Sumerian, which is a very old Mesopotamian language. So let's take a quick look at this and see what we think about it, and if we see how he's describing what he's doing. So he starts out dedicated to the god Handorsog, the chief herald of the Abzu, the fresh water under the earth. The king Enanatu, ruler of Lagash, the one granted strength by Enlil, the king of the gods, fed fine milk by the goddess Ninhursag, chosen in her heart by the goddess Nanshe, Ensegal, priest of the god Ningirsu, summoned by the goddess Inanna, whose name was chosen by Handorsag, the son of the god Lugalarab, son of Akargal, ruler of Lagash, beloved brother of Eanatu, ruler of Lagash, the previous ruler. This is how he introduces himself. What is he trying to communicate about himself that he thinks is important here at the beginning? What do you guys think? Yeah.
That his rule is basically like instated and legitimized by the gods.
He's like, hey, the gods like me. The gods chose me for this role. They raised me up. So I have the support of the gods. That's where I am. He goes on and he basically talks about making some temples for the gods. He goes on about that for quite some time. Then he gets down here. When the god Enlil relinquished control of Umma, that's another city-state, to our patron god, Lagash's patron god, Ningirsu, and placed it in the charge of my brother Enanatu, Erluma, ruler of Umma, recruited soldiers from foreign lands and transgressed the boundary channel of Ningirsu. Intasura is mine, I shall exploit it as my rightful property, he, the king of Umma, said. At the hill of Ergiga he stood his ground. What's going on here? Does anyone have a guess? What's happening? If I remind you that Ningirsu is the patron god of Lagash, which is where the ruler who's writing this comes from, what is going on? Tell your neighbor what you think might be happening. What seems to be going on here?
Yeah, this is so. This is like, yeah,
People in like here's just
Okay. So what is our guess? Any piece of this? I realize it's complicated and there's like a zillion names here. What do you got? Yeah.
We talked about how we think that this is like the argument for who gets control of the land.
Yeah, there seems to be Ananatum seems to be making a claim here about who gets control of land, and there seems to be a conflict with another ruler about who gets to control this. Yeah.
so I think, Ningirsu,
Mhm.
Inanatu
Mhm.
he's conquered the city Umma. And Erluma, ruler of Umma, is now has recruited mercenaries to try and attack the first conqueror's home, original.
Okay, you're close. You're close. Yeah.
I think Enanatu came to Uma and basically said, like, hey, the gods said that I can take control of this because my God's coming over here and we're gonna build his temple and I'm gonna take over your city. And then Orluma's like, no, you don't just get to do that. I'm gonna fight you on this. That's
Okay.
what I read. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. So you see this first part when Enlil, the king of the gods, relinquished control of Umma to Ningirsu. So he's basically saying, what this king is saying is that the king of the gods basically said that Umma was now in the control of our god, Lagash's god, Ningirsu. Now, they don't seem to have taken over the actual city itself at this point. There's a later battle where they try to do that, but actually this conflict is going to go on for 200 years. But what happens is you see that Urluma is going to transgress the boundary channel of Ningirsu. Boundary channel, irrigation canal. Irrigation canal. So basically what they're saying is that Ananachim is claiming the gods already gave him control of this irrigation canal. It already belongs to Ningirsu, his god. But the king of Umma is coming and transgressing this irrigation canal. He's taking the water. He's saying, this is mine. It's my rightful property. I can use it to irrigate my crops and my agricultural land, is what the king of Umma is saying. And so he's coming to start this fight. He's like, I need this canal. I need this water. I can't have you taking it over. But Ananachim is like, oh, the gods gave me this canal. It's mine now. And he's just like claiming, he's like, oh, it's Ningirsu's boundary channel. So I'm doing the right thing. And Anachim is saying, the king of Lagash is saying, I'm doing the right thing by defending Ningirsu's claim to this land. Ningirsu, he even now is speaking for Ningirsu. Ningirsu spoke angrily, saying, Arluma, the ruler of Umma, has said, Antasura is mine, but he who has marched into my own inner sanctum must not raise arms against Ananachim, my powerful male. He's like, what are you doing, Arluma? You can't fight Ananachim. Ananachim is my favorite. Remembering this is Ananachim's inscription, right? Ananachim beat back Arluma, the ruler of Umma, to the boundary channel of Ningirsu. At the canal, he captured him and stripped him of his cloak. So basically, he strips him naked, beats him up, and sends him home. And beats his army. And there are a bunch of other inscriptions from this conflict, from this 200-year conflict we could look at. It's all this kind of thing, where the king of Lagash is like, this is mine, it belongs to Ningirsu, I get control of this water. And then Lagash is like, no, that is my water. And then they fight. Okay? And sometimes one side wins, sometimes the other side wins. So, what do you guys get from this? How, if you had to describe this, does this seem like something that could happen today? Does it seem like a conflict we could have today and like a way of talking about the conflict we could have today? Or does this seem really different and foreign?
That's exactly what's happening today.
Yeah. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. Yeah. So how is Ananachim justifying himself here? Yeah, he's like, the gods chose me, they gave me this land, therefore we're good to go. This is how he's describing the situation. Okay, this is just showing you the trade routes from really early date. All these red lines, these are early trade routes that we know existed. So you can see there's so much trade going on. So many important trade routes. And so if your city happens to be on one of these trade routes, everyone is going to want to control that city because you got the money. You got the money coming through. You're probably very prosperous. They're going to want to control those trade routes. So over time, different ancient kingdoms and empires were constantly moving to try to gain control over these different trade routes. Okay, after this time when it's all these ancient city-states kind of competing with one another, we have a time when there's more of a succession of ancient empires Again, they're really trying to control resources and trade. Some of them do eventually get kind of territory hungry, but it's still mostly a resources and trade kind of deal. These were centered in different places all over the ancient Middle East. Some of them are more centered in Egypt, some in Mesopotamia, some in Anatolia, some in Persia, a few in Syria. That tends to be more unusual. These empires are still polytheistic. They have a bunch of different gods, and when they conquered someone, they would usually either just add those gods into the group, or they'd be like, oh, your goddess of fertility, she's actually the same as our goddess of fertility. She just had a different name over there for some reason. Still, they're caring more about being able to get taxes from wealthy cities and having access to resources and trade. Just to show you a couple of examples, this is these are some of the early Mesopotamian empires. So this yellow, that's the kingdom of Babylon under Hammurabi, for example, in the 1700s BC. So you can see very early on, we already have these very large polities coming together. Down in Egypt, again, already we have quite large unified areas at certain points. Sometimes it would fall apart, sometimes it'd be unified. So if you look at this, you can see we already have quite a bit of the Nile, sometimes under one rule. Now, a lot of times we kind of have one empire that's kind of the big bully in the room, but sometimes we actually have multiple competing empires, and that can lead to some interesting moments. Like we see in this map here, when we have basically 6 different empires all at the same time, still competing over trade and over resources, and writing each other somewhat polite, somewhat nasty letters about making sure they have the resources and trade that they want. The first empire that unified most of the ancient Middle East is one known as the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The Neo-Assyrian Empire lasted from about the 900s to the 600s BCE, and it included the whole green area here. So the dark green area it had earlier on in the 800s, and then it added in over time this whole light green area. So you can see by 671 BC, they already had this massive, massive area. Imagine trying to administrate that with no cars, without like a great road system, without fast communication system. Imagine trying to administer all that. It's pretty wild. The period of the Neo-Assyrian Empire is also important because this is the time period when much of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, is being written over mostly in Israel and Judah over here. So that is also kind of happening and starting during this period. We'll talk more about that, I think, next Wednesday. Not this Wednesday, but the one after that. After the Assyrian Empire, we had the Babylonian Empire, and then we had this massive empire. This is the Persian Empire, which lasted from about the 500s to the 300s BCE. And as you can see, it unified not only a nice chunk here of North Africa, but also it got up into Europe. It got over here into Central Asia. So it was a massive, massive empire. So during this time, we get the spread of Zoroastrianism, and we also get the spread of some unifying kind of language and culture features that continue to influence this whole area for 1,000 years, I would say, later. Now, these are all artifacts from the ancient Middle East, which were made before 2000 BC. Sometimes people look at the past and we're like, oh, people in the past, they didn't really have skills and technology as much as we do. These are all things made before 2000 BC. Tell your neighbor, what kinds of skills or knowledge or technology do you think people would need to have to make these things? Tell your neighbor what you see.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Large. Yeah.
Okay, what are some things you guys see here? Pick one of these things. Tell me what you think it is, and one thing that, yeah,
I have a question.
yeah, go for it.
Top middle one,
Yes.
is that?
So there's wood underneath, and then they've inlaid it with the blue is lapis lazuli, and then the white is either shell or ivory, depending which part of it you're looking at. Yeah, and this is meant to be the it's part of a harp. Yeah.
For example, like burns and other structures,
Mhm.
require lots of physics, math, using environmental leverage, also a system in place to get pieces to where they're supposed to be.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So this is one of the pyramids. This is one of the early ones. This is Sneferu's bent pyramid. You can see why it's called that. And already you need a massive amount of organization to get the resources there. You need a huge amount of knowledge about physics and math and architecture to make this work. This is Sneferu's second pyramid. His first one actually collapsed because they didn't calculate it right. So they kind of learned, all right, we need to change it. This one, they also started this one too steep and they realized it wasn't going to work. And so they made it more gently sloped up here so that it wouldn't collapse. And then he made them build him a third one because he's like, I don't like having a bed pyramid. So, but they're doing this tremendous amount of learning about how to do this and make this work with these incredibly heavy blocks, and they're having to figure out how do we make this not collapse. Yeah.
You know, talking about like resource gathering for building these huge monuments, you need like, advanced logistics and timetables as it comes to moving all of these resources out of the places where they were mined. You can't just do this stuff casually. You need a lot of hands working on it and also overseeing and facilitating it.
Yes. So again, a huge amount of administrative work that needs to be done. So you need to be able to record that. You need to know what different people are doing when. And a lot of the materials, like if you're building a pyramid with mostly granite blocks, granite mostly at this period in time is being mined a couple hundred miles away. So you're having to bring giant granite blocks a couple hundred miles up the Nile. And some of these other things, like lapis lazuli that's used here, that's coming from Afghanistan to Mesopotamia. This down here, Anu's White Temple, some of the stuff in here is also coming from hundreds of miles away. So, yeah. What else? Someone give me, yeah.
Notice that it's a large labor force that's needed to construct some of the bigger things. That's an excessive amount of people that are put on this one task of building a large monument.
Yep. Yes. So you need a lot of people to do this. You need a lot of people to do this. So you need to be able to call up that many people, feed them, clothe them, train them, get them to work on this, often for many years. Most pyramids took an average of about 15 years to complete.
Seems fast.
Well, they were concerned. They didn't want the pyramid to not be done by the time the pharaoh died. That would be awkward. So sometimes he did die too fast, and then you have unfinished pyramids sitting out there because you can't, then the next guy comes along. He's like, oh, I don't want that pyramid. That was for somebody else. I want a new pyramid. So get the laborers back again. Yeah. Yes.
Sculpting and stuff,
Mhm.
don't you need sharper tools like obsidian, other tools like that to carve the right amount, and also details?
Yes. So you would need a lot of tool technology in order to make something like this. So I believe this statue is made out of basalt, which is quite hard. So this is, you need very good tools and a lot of knowledge to be able to carve something and make it look this nice. Like they clearly really polished it. So even 3,500 years later, it looks really nice. Okay. So you can see there's already a lot of knowledge and skills that they had in the ancient world. Okay. As we move forward in time, we get to the Greco-Roman periods. During this time, lasting from about the 330s BC to the 312 AD, there's really a question of who we're going to be in the Middle East. Who, where do our loyalties lie? How are we going to be? There's a lot of questions about this during this time. What are the kind of overarching themes during this period? During this time, much of the Middle East was ruled either by Greek and Roman empires centered in Greece and Rome, right? Just ruling the Middle East as kind of subordinate area, or ruled by local kingdoms or empires which were controlled by elites who identified as being of Greek or Roman origin. Okay? So during this time period, there was a huge impact on the Middle East of Greek and Roman language. So Greek becomes kind of a widely used trade language, for example. Latin eventually becomes kind of the language of law through a lot of parts of the Middle East. Also, part the Middle East is being very impacted by Greek and Roman culture more generally. So how do their government structures work? What does literature look like? What does art look like? What does religion look like? Greece and Rome were also polytheistic, but a slightly different flavor of polytheistic than the type that we see in the ancient Middle East before this. So people during this time were kind of having to decide how much are we going to accept of Greek and Roman culture? What are we going to reject? And what is that going to look like? And so it's a very kind of complicated question that we see different groups kind of working through during this period. So if we look at a map, around 334 BC, Alexander the Great comes through, and he's from Macedonia over near Greece there. And so he comes and he basically takes over the whole Persian Empire and conquers all that in 4 years, which is very impressive from a military perspective, I guess. However, after he dies, he didn't bother to make it clear who his heir was supposed to be. He did have a son, but his son was like 2 years old. And so obviously he was not exactly grasping the reins of power. And so what ends up happening is about 34 of Alexander's generals divide up his empire between them. Now, very rapidly, what happens is the more powerful generals start taking over the pieces that were controlled by other generals. So pretty rapidly, you end up with this kind of situation where there are like a much smaller number of things going on here. So his general Ptolemy took over Egypt. His general Seleucus ended up with Mesopotamia and part of Central Asia. Antigonus got this part eventually, as well as this. And so for a while, we have these different empires which identify as being Greek ish empires in control of the area and all competing with one another. Okay. Yeah. Now, not too long after that, the Romans start rising up and they eventually end up taking over a lot of that area. So by 14 AD or CE, they already have Egypt, they already have the Mediterranean coast, they have Asia Minor up here, is what they called it, in Anatolia. They've already taken a good chunk of this. So that's when kind of Roman ideas and culture spread through the region. During this point, one of the important things that we're going to talk about a bit later in the quarter is the spread of Judaism and Christianity. So, right around the year 30 AD CE is the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, which is kind of as you probably know, a central event of the New Testament and the foundation of Christianity, right? Following that, we have a number of decades in which the New Testament text is being written. And then starting around, ugh, I'm not wording well today. I'm sorry, guys. In 70 AD, we have the Romans destroying the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Because of these varying things that are going on, this time period, starting in the first century AD and then extending into the future, this time period sees Jews, Jewish Christians, and non-Jewish Christians scattering around the Roman Empire, which we remember included a lot of Europe, North Africa. So they scatter all around that area. And they also try to move out of the Roman Empire because, hey, we just had a big conflict with the Roman Empire. And so a lot of them actually move east into the Parthian Empire. So this light green part here, this is the Parthian Empire. So when the Romans come in, they take over this kind of coastal area, but they kind of leave Mesopotamia itself alone. They don't get in there immediately. And so the Parthians, which is sometimes called the Second Persian Empire, they kind of come and unify this area. And then the Romans and the Parthians basically fight over Mesopotamia back and forth for the next several centuries. Okay. So a lot of Jews and Christians end up moving out of the Roman Empire into the Parthian Empire to try to get into a better position. Any questions about that so far? So we've talked about the ancient Middle East, we've talked about the Greek and Roman periods. Okay, let's take a break until 2:30. Let's take a break until 2:30. Okay, let's get back into it. So now we're going to move into the later Roman period to the Crusades. So from about 312 to the 1200s AD CE. Okay. During this time, we're going to see that people are really now going to start fighting about religion. Before this time period, people would sometimes justify their conflicts with religion, like we saw with Enanatu. He's like, the gods gave me power and they gave me this land. But now this is the period when people are really going to start fighting either because of religion or they'll say at least that they're fighting because of religion. Okay? So stuff is going down at this point in the Roman Empire. In the 200s AD, there's this time when a whole bunch of emperors get murdered in a very short time. And every single time one of them goes down, there's a civil war between like 4 or 5 different people all trying to claim the imperium. As you can imagine, there are also frequent rebellions because the people in outlying areas are like, hey, you're not protecting us right now. You're just making us pay higher and higher taxes to pay for these wars that we're having. It's not doing us any good. And hey, you guys seem busy. So we're just going to rebel and try to go do our own thing now. So a lot of stuff is going on. Some of these emperors decide to try to help create unity by killing off atheists. What does the word atheist mean? Someone help me out? Yeah. Yeah, that's how we usually understand it. People, someone who doesn't believe in God. But for the Romans, this seemed to mostly mean Christians. Why do you guys think that Christians would count as atheists for the Romans? Yeah.
The Rome centered around the emperor, which was considered to be one of the final authorities in just about everything. And Christians believe only in one God and that no one else is divine. Therefore, the emperor can't be a god.
Yep. So the Christians are going around being like, the emperor's not a god. And also, we're not willing to do the sacrifices to the emperor and to Jupiter that you're supposed to do as part of community festivals, that you're supposed to do if you go to a court of law. So if you're in ancient Rome and you go to court, you're supposed to do sacrifices to the Roman gods as part of that, to like call them to watch you and make sure, and you're going to swear you're going to tell the truth before the Roman gods, right? The Christians would go to court and they'd be like, no, we're not doing that. And then they would generally end up being horribly executed. So the emperors are like, these atheists, they're the problem. They're the problem with our empire, not the fact we can't decide who should be in charge. So we're gonna kill a whole bunch of them. Surely that will create unity. As you can imagine, that did not work very well. However, there is a turning point. So in 312 AD, Constantine, who was a Roman general at the time and a relative of former emperors, has become one of the claimants in one of these civil wars. He is trying to take over the Roman Empire and become the emperor. Okay? Now, according to his pet historian, Eusebius, this is what happens. Constantine said that around noon he saw with his own eyes a cross of light in the sky above the sun, bearing the inscription, "Conquer by this." At this sight he was amazed. In his sleep, the Christ of God appeared to him with the same sign which he had seen in the sky, and commanded him to make a likeness of the sign and use it as a safeguard in all his battles with his enemies. Being amazed at this extraordinary vision and resolving to worship only the God who had appeared to him, Constantine sent for those who knew about Jesus' teachings. So basically, Constantine says, hey, I saw a vision. God talked to me. And so I'm going to now conquer the Roman Empire and take over it in the name of God. And he then makes Christianity the Roman Empire's official religion. So this is very different from what some previous emperors had done, right? Why do you guys think he might make this move? Tell your neighbor, why would he make this move? Tell your neighbor. Wild speculation is accepted.
So one is
Yeah, pretty responsible. Like how, is in the relationship with the person.
And so they got the army there, so.
What do you guys think? Why would Constantine make a move like this? Yeah.
As of like the vision he had, like he believed in the legitimacy of Christianity, so he like considered it as the official religion because he believed so much that it was real.
Okay, so maybe he really had this vision and he's like, okay, we're good to go. God talked to me. Yeah.
I think that what we said over here was that converting the empire basically to Christianity would allow all of the Christians who had fled the empire and gone to Asia and Africa to reintegrate and sort of rejoin what they had.
Okay, so killing them and persecuting them is not working. So they're just leaving or dying. And so if we do this, they're able to reintegrate into the Roman Empire. Okay. Other options? Yeah.
To get the Roman army and like portions of the Roman population that were starting to believe on his side and bid the throne.
Okay, yeah. There were a number of like whole battalions of the army that are said to have become Christian. Like there's a whole story from the reign of Marcus Aurelius about the what was actually known as the Christian battalion. And this fight that Marcus Aurelius was having with the Visigoths, and he gets rescued because the Christian battalion all pray when they're surrounded by the Visigoths, and there's this giant hailstorm that kills all their enemies. It's great. Anyway, so there are definitely parts of the population that are converting, and so this would allow them to integrate. Any other reasons you could think he would make this move? Okay, yeah.
I might be repeating what's already said, but I think he just wanted loyal warriors.
Okay.
Probably, as many, perhaps there were as many Christians as non-Christians. And so he said,
I think they were still a minority, but they were definitely like a well-known minority at this point. Yeah. Did you have okay. Yeah.
I want to do it like national unity. Bring the whole country together to this one religion. That kind of, as a Christian emperor, more of a
Yeah, so it's a different way to try to achieve unity because clearly the Roman religion is not doing the job. Clearly, the political situation is very fragmented, so that might be part of this. So he makes Christianity the official religion. His successors go back and forth on this quite a lot for the next 50 years before eventually settling on being okay with it. But Christianity, the effect was that it was a huge unifying force at a time when the empire was very divided. In particular, things that Constantine seems to have noticed is that Christianity claimed that people of all classes and ethnic origins were of equal value, including slaves. There had been a bunch of slave rebellions recently. There had been all kinds of conflicts, people who are conflicted because it's a huge empire, right? People of different ethnic backgrounds are like, why are we getting ignored? Why are we being treated as second-class citizens? Christianity is like, all these people are of equal value. And so Constantine is like, this can maybe help us be unified. So he really needed this unity. Now, scholars are very divided on whether Constantine was actually a Christian or not. For example, he refused to be baptized until he was literally dying. Before that, he's like, I don't want to do that. He also maintained his position as high priest of Rome for the Roman religion through most of his life, which seems not necessarily like, you would expect. But it's scholars also are like, but he did support them and he spent a lot of resources trying to promote Christianity. He even called a church council so that a whole bunch of Christians could get together and like agree on what they actually believed. He's like, okay, you guys come fight it out. We need to know what you're supposed to believe to be a Christian. So he's on the one hand really trying to support Christianity, but on the other hand, in his personal life, he's not necessarily that committed to it. So it's unclear exactly what his status was. Anyway, time goes on, and the Roman Empire ends up splitting in half, which impacts what happens with the Middle East. So in 364 AD CE, two brothers end up splitting the Roman Empire into Western and Eastern sections. And there's a whole complicated story with this. Just know that it splits. And the Eastern half becomes what's called the Byzantine Empire, okay, whose official religion is specifically Eastern Orthodox Christianity. The Western half goes off and their official religion becomes Roman Catholicism, right? So we have two different brands of Christianity that are sometimes not the same, right? As the official religions of these two places. The Byzantine Empire over in the east is over in Anatolia. It's over in the Middle East region. And over time becomes more and more like connected more with the people to the east of them in the Sasanian Empire. And they control part of the Middle East, at least, until their fall in 1453. So this is a long time that we've got Byzantine Empire over there. Its borders change a lot over time, but kind of give you this idea. So here is the Byzantine Empire. You can see they've got Greece, they've got Anatolia. At various points in time, they also have this whole region here, but they're kind of going back and forth about this region with the Sasanian Empire, which is sometimes called the Third Persian Empire. Okay, so you can also see we have this very powerful empire over here, the Sasanian Empire, and there's a lot of cool stuff going on over here. It's one of the more understudied periods of history for this region. So if any of you guys want to go become Sasanianists, that would be very helpful. Now, during this time, we also have the birth of another very important religion, right? The birth of Islam. So in the late 500s to early 600s, here in Arabia, we have a guy named Muhammad, and we'll hear a lot more about him later in the unit. But basically, he becomes the founder of the Islamic religion, which interacts with the earlier religions of Judaism and Christianity, but also has a lot of its own stuff going on, right? Dr. McCabe will tell you all about that. During this time, we also have the beginning of the writing of the Quran and a very rapid expansion in Islam. So we see they sort of start out in this area, and then pretty rapidly, these different colored areas on this map here accept Islamic authority. So by 631, so a year before Muhammad dies, the Sasanian Empire is now like, they like Islam now. So it's expanding very rapidly in the Middle East. So then over time, we have a bunch of stuff going on. We see more and more spread of Islam. So all of the kind of colored areas are places that Islam spreads to over the next about 200 years. Okay, so we see North Africa, we see Spain, we see Central Asia, we see it spreading very rapidly. And this also means that we now have a bunch of different kingdoms whose official religion is Islam, but don't necessarily all get along with each other, right? Like the Christian kingdoms up in Europe are all fighting each other. The Islamic kingdoms here are often fighting each other. That's just the way humans be humaning, unfortunately. So that is all going on during this time. Now, if we look at the 700s AD, just because Islam has kind of grown rapidly through the region doesn't mean it's the only religion that's there, right? So during this time in the 700s, we also have a whole bunch of different varieties of Christians, and we have Zoroastrians, and we have, of course, many kind of more local religions which don't even make it onto the map. So we still have an incredible amount of religious diversity. It's just that Islam has like spread, and so it tends to get the headlines. Now, one of the big things that ends up happening round about the 800s is there was this early Islamic empire called the Abbasid Empire, and they had been fairly unified, but they end up kind of falling apart. And now you have a whole bunch of different pieces which are officially Muslim, but they're doing different things. And they often have this conflict with one another, partly because some of them are one variety of Islam, Sunni Islam, and some of them are a different variety of Islam, Shia Islam. Lillian will tell you all about that. So the kind of darker green area is kind of dominated by Shia Islam, although people who believe in Sunni Islam also live here, but Shia is kind of official. And then this kind of lighter green area, these lighter green areas, these are dominated by Sunni Islam. We also have an issue during this time when the Seljuk Turks, who had converted to Islam, also start getting on the move. So, right around the year 1000, the Seljuks come through and they end up taking over what had been a lot of the Byzantine territory, not quite all of it. The Byzantines are still hanging on in Greece, as well as a lot of the former kind of Abbasid territory, and they expand through this region. So that really expands the influence of Turkic languages, Turkic culture, and Turkic art, and all these kinds of things. It spreads that through this whole region, the Middle East and Central Asia. So there's a lot going on during this period. What are we kind of taking away from it? We want to take away from it the spread of Islam, and we want to see that just because people have the same religion as one another doesn't mean they all get along. And just because people have different religions from one another doesn't necessarily mean that they don't get along. So, depending what Islamic state you're in, if I was a Christian during this period, in some Islamic states, that would be perfectly fine. I'd be treated just the same as everybody else. In other Islamic states, it wouldn't be so good to admit to that. Okay? So, depending where you are, the relationships between the different religions was very different. Okay? Now, unfortunately, during this time, and we'll hear about the Crusades later in this quarter, during this time, Europeans were also arriving in the region and trying to establish their own kingdoms. So we have a little map here. You can see they establish a bunch of kingdoms kind of in Syria and down into kind of the modern Israel area. They establish a whole bunch of different kingdoms, and they end up in this kind of long fight with the various Islamic powers of the region. And of course, they're claiming that they're doing this for religious reasons. And this is something we'll talk about when we get to the Crusades lecture. But they're all there and they're saying they're doing this for the glory of Christianity. A lot of them, if you look at what they're actually doing, it's like very suspicious. Like, you don't care about Christianity, clearly, at all. They're like, oh, we're gonna go rescue Jerusalem for some reason. But actually, no, we're just gonna conquer some territory up here in Edessa and start a kingdom. I'm sure that's just as valuable. It's just like, what are you doing? What? So we really see during this time people from a variety of backgrounds kind of weaponizing religion and being like, we want to have a conflict with these people for some reason. Let's say that this is about religion, and that way we can get all the poor peons to agree with us and go and fight with us. So, anyway, I have opinions about that, but so by the 1200s BC, AD, sorry, so used to BC. What's going on at the end of this kind of period? The Eastern Orthodox Byzantine Empire, they've lost a lot of ground. They basically just got Greece and Macedonia left. The Catholic Crusader kingdoms, on the other hand, are at their height. They're doing really well over there in the Middle East. In Egypt, we have the Muslim Fatimid Caliphate, maybe mispronouncing that, but they're doing pretty well. In a lot of other parts of the Middle East, the Seljuk Turks are the main force, and they seem to be doing pretty well. Um, Although many of their conflicts with one another between these groups, the conflicts between these groups, are largely really about trade and resources still, they tend to say that it's about religion. When you actually look at the details, it's very suspect about whether this is really about religion a lot of the time. Okay, any thoughts or questions about that? Okay, let's move on and talk briefly about struggles between Islamic states in the 1200s to 1800s. What do you guys think? Why would different kingdoms that have the same religion, that in this case happens to be Islam, why would they have conflicts with one another? Yeah.
Because all empires have conflicts with one another. For the same reasons as they always do, right? You know, they have the same religion, but they want each other's land and they want each other's resources.
Yeah. They still want the resources, they still want the trade, they still want the land, they still want the power. It doesn't matter necessarily that they all have the same official religion. So, briefly, there's a brief moment when something completely different actually happens, which is the Mongols actually come through and conquer a bunch of the Middle East. Do you guys know this? Like Genghis Khan, those guys, they actually come through for a while, but they don't keep it for all that long. The Middle East is kind of out in the margins for them, so they mostly have their heartland in more like Central Asia type area. But what this does do it creates growing ties, even more ties with Central Asia and with more Eastern Asia culture and trade and people. And so we see even more kind of international movement and movement of culture during this time. Um, Now, interestingly, some of the Mongol successor states, after Genghis Khan's empire and his grandson's empire kind of fall apart, some of them actually later convert to Islam or Christianity. Do you guys know this? I think this is really cool. Another thing that's very understudied, I think. So you can see, like up here in the Russian areas and in Georgia, they become Christian, and then a lot of these areas become Islamic. Okay. Well, after the Mongols kind of pull out of the region, their control of the region kind of falls apart. It's mostly still Islamic powers in the area then. What ends up happening is something new happens. Previously, most of the elites of the different Islamic kingdoms tended to be people who claimed Arabic ethnicity, even if it was quite far back at this point. But what ends up happening is around 1250, the Turkish slaves in the Egyptian army basically rebel and take over Egypt. So we now have basically these Turkish people of enslaved origin taking over, and they're known as the Mamluks. They then go and they take out the Crusader kingdoms up here along the coast, and they do pretty well for themselves for about 250 years. eventually they fall to what becomes known as the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire starts here in Anatolia, kind of modern Turkey, in the 1300s and ends up growing rapidly. They take out the Byzantine Empire in 1453. They expand south, and so by 1517, they control both Jerusalem, which is a holy city for Jews and Christians, and Mecca, which is a holy city for Muslims. For them, Sunni Islam is their official religion, but within the Ottoman Empire, there are people of many different religions, many different backgrounds. And it really depends what province of the empire you're in, how you're going to be treated. The Ottoman Empire continues to grow for centuries and manages to maintain power in the region for hundreds of years, despite the fact that they do have pressure around their borders. So the Safavid Empire to the east, sometimes known as, I think, the Fifth Persian Empire, they're creating a lot of pressure. Various Mongol successor states, especially coming from up here. The Russian powers are growing. And of course, European powers continue to be interested in the region. So even though there's a lot of kind of pressure from various places, the Ottoman Empire continues to grow. Here's a picture. This is from an illuminated manuscript. So you can see over here, an illuminated manuscript is basically an illustrated text. So here's the picture kind of blown up here. This is from the Ottoman Empire. Tell your neighbor what you see here. Is there anything you can figure out about Ottoman culture or life in this particular part of the Ottoman Empire from this picture? Tell your neighbor what you see. What do you guys see? What do you see here? What do you think is going on? Or yeah.
Sorry I talked so much this lecture, but
You're fine.
the picture is actually in miniature painting style, which borrows from Persian miniature, which itself is borrowed from Chinese miniature. So we have this transfer of styles basically across Asia. That's where sort of like the intricate background work comes from. Also, if you know, for a lot of people, it might be strange to see a depiction of these people in like a Sunni Muslim context. And I think that it is owed to the presence of like Sufism and esoteric Islam in the Ottoman Empire, which was very much like the height of that sort of like order in Turkey.
Okay, so you made a couple of important points. This art style has its ultimate origin much farther east in Asia. So, like, if you look at like these beautiful plant details and like all the wild stuff happening in the background here, a lot of that is ultimately coming from very far away. So we have that transfer of culture. We also have all these gentlemen gathered together in this kind of religious context. Yeah. What else do you guys see? Yeah.
All of the characters with no beards, I'm presuming are women, and none of them are centrally located. They're all kind of out of the sides.
Up in the back here.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Is that
Um,
conveying anything?
With that headgear, what does anyone know more about this period of history than me? Like with this headgear, I wasn't reading them as female, but I could be wrong. This isn't my area. Anyone have thoughts? Yeah,
Good service too. It's like
that could also be.
more central, like they're
Hmm.
more this responsive like headwear, but the
Hmm.
ones like to the bottom left and top right, like they look like they're at the beck and call of the door or something. I know, so
Yeah, they're sort of to the side, they're sort of to the back. So whether these are women or servants, these are people who are more marginalized from the conversation.
Were servants allowed to? I'm just basing this on.
Yeah,
Of the shape of the not plan. So accurate.
I think it depends when and where. But
It could also show youth.
yeah,
I mean, facial hair is often tied to
Yeah.
masculinity and coming of age, so they could just be younger members of the audience, not quite as central with figures of power as
mhm.
the other people in the band.
Yeah. So we can tell from looking at this, there's some interesting stuff going on. And we really like you need someone who knows more about this than me to like bring it all out. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, speaking about the beards, I
Mhm.
hate to interject once again, but growing beard is like a sunnah in Islam or accepted tradition.
Mhm.
So that is probably why all of the figures at the center are wearing it, because it is probably in like more of a religious context.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Are they in the mosque and the central figures of the mosque?
That could well be. It does look like these beautiful interior decorations do remind me of mosque decoration quite a lot. Yeah.
Like it looks like a rug, like
Mm-hmm.
the bottom, like a rug, and then it's like a chair.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Then we move into our last period. Last period, we're almost there. Made it through 5,000 years of history. During our last period, we have a time of European domination of the area from the 1800s into the 1900s. So the Ottoman Empire, this is the Ottoman Empire again, and they at one point had all these kind of colored areas. But over time, they gradually lose control of them, starting with these areas in the kind of lightest color until they are losing more and more until they get to a point where they just have this left by 1914. So they keep losing their border territories, largely to European powers and Russia. Ultimately, in 1914, they lose control completely, and the Ottoman Empire ends up being divided up by France, Italy, Britain, and Russia primarily. What do the European powers want? Or at least what do they say they want? They say that they want access to Jerusalem because religion, question mark. They say that they want to prevent attack by other powers. So they don't like the fact that the Ottoman Empire had this large chunk of Europe, and they're like, we don't like that. So we want to get rid of this empire so that they can't come over here again, I guess. They want better access to trade routes, just like always. So many trade routes go through the Middle East. Like everybody wants the Middle East for the trade routes. And also, as we heard mentioned a little bit last time, there's also the discovery of oil. Starting in 1908, when the British discovered oil in Iran, and then continuing on, they end up discovering oil in Iraq, Bahrain, Arabia, Kuwait. They find all this oil, and today, more than 50% of the known world oil reserves are in the Middle East. So they really want access to that. As more types of technology and engines are being developed, people really want access to oil for a lot of things, as well as for different kinds of manufacturing. And so they're like, you know what? We want a piece of this pie. So in 1916, these European powers come in and they're like, oh, let's get together with our other European competitors and we're going to decide which parts of the Ottoman Empire we each get. And we're going to divide it up so that we all have access to the resources that we want. Okay? So the blue part, the dark blue part, goes to France. The orange part goes to Russia. This yellow part down here goes to Italy. The blue part is an Arab state, but under French protection, quote unquote. The purple is going to be under joint British, French, and Russian protection. The sort of pink down here, this is going to be British. And then this lighter colored purple, this is going to be an Arab state, but under British protection. Now, what problems do we see with this? Yeah.
It has no regard for the cultural groups that are in the area. It's just willy-nilly just cut up and artificially put together.
Yeah. They like a lot of time for a lot of these borders, they didn't ask anybody who lived there. They're just like, you know what? It's convenient for us to chop it up this way. It has nothing to do with what the people who live there want. It has nothing to do with where different ethnicities are living or where different languages are spoken. We're just going to chop this up like this because it's convenient for us and we think it's a good idea. Okay. As you can imagine, this leads to problems. Very quickly, they realize their original plan didn't quite work, and so they almost immediately have to adjust it. So they move their stuff around a bit. They're also having some conflicts themselves, and so they adjust based on that as well. But basically, you end up with this whole kind of purple area under British control. So basically, you can see the British area grew. And then you can see the French area here. They sort of unified their two different areas. It's just like, it's wild what they're doing over there. And again, they're still not really paying attention to what makes sense for the people who actually live there. And we still have a situation. How well do you think a bunch of random British elites who know nothing about Islam or Zoroastrianism or Eastern forms of Christianity, or like local cultural issues, how well do you think they would do at ruling over the people of this region? You think they're going to do a good job? Yeah. They're going to do a terrible job. Yeah. Now, here's one of the things just to show you what this is like. Okay. In 1922, Egypt is given independence. Please note the quote marks. Declaration to Egypt by His Britannic Majesty's government. Whereas His Majesty's government, in accordance with their declared intentions, desire forthwith to recognize Egypt as an independent sovereign state, and whereas the relations between His Majesty's government and Egypt are of vital interest to the British Empire, the following principles are hereby declared. The British protectorate over Egypt is terminated, and Egypt is declared to be an independent sovereign state. So soon as the government of His Highness shall pass an act of indemnity with application to all inhabitants of Egypt, martial law, which was proclaimed back in 1914, shall be withdrawn. So Egypt has been under martial law for 8 years. The following matters are still absolutely reserved to the discretion of His Majesty's government, until such time as it may be possible by free discussion and friendly accommodation on both sides, I'm sure, to conclude agreements in regard thereto between His Majesty's government and the government of Egypt. The security of the communications of the British Empire in Egypt, the defense of Egypt against all foreign aggression or interference, direct or indirect, the protection of foreign interests in Egypt and the protection of minorities, The Sudan. Pending the conclusion of such agreements, status quo in all these matters shall remain intact. So what is this actually saying? Do you think Egypt is independent? Does this sound like independent and sovereign to you? The British are basically saying, oh, yeah, Egypt, you're independent except for the things where we don't want you to be independent. So you can't read our communications. If anyone attacks you, we have the right to bring troops down, as many as we want, and defend you against all threats, direct or indirect. Please note this. There is so much wiggle room here. Oh, there's some guy somewhere who said something bad about Egypt. Bring the troops, bring the troops. Like, you can absolutely see them doing that, right? The protection of foreign interests in Egypt. So you aren't shipping us the oil we want. We can come down with the troops. Protection of minorities. So we don't like how you're treating people. We can bring in the troops. And the Sudan. So they're like, yeah, we can keep all our troops in the Sudan. Basically, we can, there was a whole war going on there at this point, in Sudan. And we are just gonna keep moving our troops through Egypt to get there, and that's all fine according to this agreement. So this is the kind of thing that's going on. So this can also be seen as an example of Orientalism. They're like, we don't trust you to handle stuff. We don't trust you to defend yourselves. We don't trust you to protect minorities. If we make an agreement with you about resources, we don't trust you to be able to fulfill that agreement. So we want to make sure that we can still swoop in and do whatever we want when we want to. And this is the kind of thing that Britain, France, Italy, Russia are all doing in the region during this time. Okay? Sometimes they don't even bother to proclaim independence. They're just like, you belong to us. You get to do what we want. As you can imagine, the people who live in the region are not necessarily fans of this. So, for example, the people who live in Arabia, they manage to get unified and they start attacking British-controlled territories. They're like, get out of here. And they're somewhat successful at that, though not entirely. But still, like, even during World War II, the European powers are using the Middle East as part of their theater of war. You see a whole crazy thing going on. So there's a whole issue where Iraq was basically, and Persia were basically trying to supply the Soviet Union in the war. And so the Allies didn't like that. And so they're now attacking Persia. And, Persia had tried to stay neutral in the war, but the British invade it anyway and change its ruler because they want to. It's a whole thing. Anyway, it's wild. Now, after World War II, many Middle Eastern regions finally get their independence back from the colonial powers, and we see somewhat less oversight by the Europeans, gradually more and more independence for the local powers. And we see new borders being drawn. These were somewhat more to do with what people wanted, but still to a large extent, these borders are more based on what the colonial powers had done in the region than on what the local people actually wanted to have happen. So the borders are still not being made by the people who actually know what the local considerations are. Many Muslim territories at this time kind of grouped together as the Arab League, partly because they are like, our religion should unify us, and partly because they're like, we really do not want to let the Europeans keep messing with us, and so we need to present a unified front so that we can have some bargaining power in this situation. So, by the mid-1900s, what's the situation? At this point, we see many new nations which are trying to build new national identities. Their borders were not necessarily where local people would have put them. So now they're like, how can we unify ourselves as Syrians or as Jordanians? How can we do that, for example? They're wondering at this point, is having Muslim identity, is this going to help us be united? Is this going to be enough? Are the European powers really going to stay out of our business? What do we need to do to make sure that they do? And also, it was already starting to become clear there are big imbalances in who has oil reserves, who has trade route access, who has other resources. And so different countries are already looking at each other, being like, how is this going to work out? So this is kind of where we end up in the mid 1900s. Any questions about anything we've talked about today or final thoughts? Yeah.
So let's say that part of that wings the Middle East be the European power, not Ottoman.
Yeah, so during the 1200s to 1800s, the answer would be the Ottoman Empire, but then they later fall apart. So, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, next time, Malika Yupel-Koch will be talking to us about language and power in the Middle East and about oral history and how we can use that to understand what's going on. If you did a paper version of this, you can drop it off on this little table up here, and I will grab those. And I will see you guys on Wednesday.